Hi, I'm Jennifer Storm. I'm the coordinator for advocacy and community outreach with Andreazzi Input. Today we're going to talk about grooming. Every 9 minutes in the United States, a child is sexually abused. This is a startling statistic, and oftentimes people are dumbfounded about how it happens. How is it that children are harmed at such a high degree? How is it that as communities, as parents, as caregivers, we miss the signs? And that is oftentimes because predators and pedophiles and those who seek to harm children, they're tactical, they're strategic, they know what they're doing. There is this concept called grooming that predators and pedophiles use in order to gain access to children and to earn the trust of communities. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what grooming is and what it looks like and how you can intervene if you suspect someone is attempting to groom your child. So grooming can happen in a variety of ways. It can happen one-on-one, right, from coach to child, priest to child, parent to child, caregiver to child. It can be that relationship that is developed with a child where a person takes a keen interest in that child's behaviors and that child's life. They befriend them. They become cool. They talk the lingo. They start to develop a relationship with a child where that child wants to be around them more. They'll do things like give that child gifts. They will compliment the child. Oftentimes, grooming, those that are good at grooming are going to hone in on that one thing or those few things that they know that that child is missing in their life. So whether it's a child with low self-esteem, whether it's a child that comes from an impoverished home, whether it's a child that doesn't have a lot of family support at home, they're going to hone in on those things and then they're going to provide those things. So for the child who has low self-esteem, it's going to be complimenting them. It's going to be making them feel like they matter. It's going to be making them feel like they are being seen. Maybe showering them with attention, showering them with gifts. If the person comes from an impoverished background, it could be giving them things that they know the parents can't provide or the caregivers can't provide. That way they're making themselves enticing to that child and they're making that child like really depend upon that other adult. That's a big part of grooming, is cultivating that relationship so that the child sees this person as a positive influence in their life, as somebody they want to be around, as someone who's cool, someone who's fun, someone who's going to give them things that they can't otherwise get. Oftentimes, those gifts will start to then slowly become secrets between the person who's grooming the child and the child. So it'll be, I know you're not allowed to have candy, but it's just our secret. So I'm going to give you this, or I know you're not supposed to have ice cream before dinner, but that's just going to be between us, okay? They'll do those things that'll make the child feel excited, like they're getting away with something, or they're doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, and they're doing it with this adult, so it must be okay, right? It manipulates the child's trust. It manipulates the child's understanding, and it allows them to gain the child's trust. And once you start to develop and cultivate secrets with a child, they then slowly start to cultivate that into keeping other secrets that could and eventually will lead to the sexual abuse that they may begin engaging with your child. Most sexual abuse does not start with touch. It starts in this grooming way. It starts in building that relationship with the child. Once they have that relationship, then they're going to start testing the boundaries, right? They're going to take it from maybe it's a compliment to placing their hand on the person's knee as they're giving the compliment. And as they're doing this, they're testing the response of the child. And if the child pulls back, they'll pull back the hand. And then they'll try it another time. If the child seems to be nonchalant about it or comfortable or doesn't have a response, then they're going to take that as a sign that they can move on to the next step. Maybe the next time they're going to put their hand on their lower back or on their shoulders or put their arm around the child. Typically, sexual abuse is a progression of incremental moments that person is doing to test the child. What they're also doing with the child, though, is slowly introducing the concept of touch in an innocent, innocuous way, right? Someone putting their hand on your shoulders, like, oh, but it's getting that person from it, like, oh, this person touches me. Maybe the next time it's, hey, can I have a hug? And you give them a hug. Now that child will associate like, oh, I hug this person. And then the next time it could be tickling. Well, we tickle. That's just something we do. We play this game where we roll around and we tickle and we laugh and we have fun. But then the tickling starts to go from innocent places to sexual parts on the child's body. And it becomes very confusing for the child because an activity that seemed very innocent starts turning in a direction that feels uncomfortable for them and they don't understand. Yet they're still associating this person with somebody who does this. All the while, the person who's doing this is trying to normalize that behavior. Like, oh yeah, well, I was just tickling you. I'm so sorry, my hand must have slipped. Or, oh, I'm so sorry that made you uncomfortable. This is just the game that we play. And they'll slowly test your boundaries and the child's boundaries and the child's limits. They'll do this until they eventually do commit sexual abuse. By the time the actual sexual abuse has happened, the child is so confused about the boundaries they have with this person that sometimes they don't even know if what has happened is wrong. Particularly in children who have never had strong sex education, who have never had those conversations with other adults or caregivers about good touch, bad touch, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. Those lines are even blurrier for those children because they don't know really what's right and what's wrong. They don't understand. Is biologically, neurologically, our bodies are wired to enjoy sex. That's a part of us as human beings. And this thing can happen called sexual non-concordance during sexual abuse, where a child is being sexually abused. And even though it is abuse, that child's body may still respond in the way that we are biologically and neurologically wired to respond. This can add an additional layer of confusion to that child, because if it feels like they enjoyed it, or if their body did something that would indicate that they enjoyed what happened, it's going to further complicate in their mind, was this abuse? Did I like it? If this thing happened, if this biological response happened, does that mean it really wasn't abuse? Was I at fault? Is it my fault? They're going to ask themselves all those questions, and it's going to further confuse whether or not what's happening to them is really sexual abuse, or whether it's something that's wrong, whether it's something that's illegal. Having those conversations with your children early and often is the best way to build resiliency in that child to be able to identify very quickly that something that's happening to them is wrong. Now, let me make it very clear. Even if they're able to identify that something that's happening to them is something that's really wrong, they still may not disclose. There's a lot of reasons why. When a person is being sexually abused, the sexual abuse is usually 5 to 10% of that whole relationship that they have with that person. So what do I mean by that? 90 or 95% of the time, that person is charismatic. They're loving, they're supportive, they're providing things for that child. They're fun to be around. They are their coach, their mentor, their friend, their confidant. And then there's this 5 or 10% of the time that really bad, confusing things happen. It's hard for children and young adults to separate those things in their head. It's much easier to focus on the good parts of this person and just push away this bad stuff that might be happening. More sinisterly, that person may be threatening your child. They may be using that relationship and using your relationship against you, against that child, by saying things like, well, I'll tell your parents, or nobody will believe you if you report. And your parents know me, they love me, they trust me, they would never believe you over me. Or I am the coach, or I am the priest. They'll use their title in a way to scare the child, to threaten the child into thinking that they won't be believed. If the abuser is using substances as a way to gain sexual access to your child, such as giving them alcohol or giving them drugs or giving them cigarettes, that's another thing that person is going to use against the child. Well, how do you even know what happened? You were drunk. Or I'll just tell your parents that you were too drunk. You didn't know what was happening. Or just the reality of telling the parents or the caregivers that the child may have been using drugs or alcohol or smoking is enough to scare that child. Any way that they can threaten or intimidate that child, they're going to use that to keep that child quiet. So we talked a lot about ways that potential predators will groom the child, but it's not just the child that's being groomed in these cases. Often we read these headlines of somebody who was a pillar in the community that was well known, and the community is shocked that this person has actually been offending on children. It happens time after time. That is also because they groom the community. Predators are going to be charismatic in their communities. They're going to be in positions of authority. Predators and those that want to offend upon children are going to seek out those positions in the community that give them access to children. That's where they need to be because that's where they want to engage. So they're going to be coaches, they're going to be clergy, they're going to be esteemed members of society that people trust, that people look up to, that people will leave their children with, that it's a norm to leave your children with. So it's really important to understand that the reason the community is shocked when these things happen is because you were also groomed by that person. You were being fed of as many lies as your child was. You were being groomed to trust, to believe in, and to have faith in this person that they had the best interest of your child at heart. That's the primary goal of grooming, is to get you to think that this person is safe, is trustworthy. And then you're going to let your guard down and you're going to allow them into your home and into your family and into your community. Sometimes that person, over 90% of the time, is in your family, right? So these are people that you already trust, that you've grown up with, that you would never conceive would do something like this to your child. It's super easy to blame yourself and to feel shame for not knowing. Please understand that grooming is very calculated. It's very manipulative. That's the point of it. It's supposed to be insidious and undetected. We hope that this video gave you a little bit of insight into grooming, into the psychological tactics that groomers use, and it gives you the tools and tips that maybe you need to identify it not only in your own community, but also to have really good conversations with your children. The best way to prevent sexual abuse is to communicate frequently and often with your child. Now I want to pause here for a second because it seems like so often the burden is on us to prevent sexual abuse. And that can feel really daunting because it's never the victim's fault when somebody sexually perpetrates abuse on that person. And so often it can feel like we're the ones that have to be always on guard and we have to have the tools and the tips to prevent. And it really also needs to be about identifying these predators, identifying these behaviors early, and removing these people from positions of authority and power. So the way that we can do that in our communities is to be on alert, to look for these signs and symptoms. If you know that abuse is happening, don't cover it up. Don't engage in any form of a cover-up. Even if it's within your employment, if it's within your social group, if it's in your family, it can feel really scary to disrupt a family unit, to disrupt an organization, to disrupt your church, to disrupt your school system. But know that by doing so, you are saving children's lives. You are bringing forth information that could lead to the end of sexual violence against children. Please know that it's important to speak up. You can do so by reporting anonymously to Childline because maybe you're not sure. Maybe you're seeing behaviors and you don't want to call somebody out because you're uncomfortable. Get in touch with RAIN. Get in touch with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Talk to your local rape crisis center. Talk to an attorney. Andreazian Foot cares about you and your family. We care about our community. We want to hold institutions and organizations accountable for covering up child sexual abuse.